agenda item, though, is the approval and modification of the agenda. I wanted to announce a request from the great city of Norfolk, yay, to modify the proposed HRPDC letter in your consent agenda regarding the comments on the Virginia Coastal Resilience Master Planning Framework. So we'd like to take out number 6E from the consent agenda and separate that out, and we'll be addressing that and voting on that individually as a result. Other than that, are there any other modifications to the agenda? Hearing none, I ask for a motion to approve the agenda with that modification.
So moved.
Okay, it's been properly moved and seconded. Thank you.
If we could just recap, Ms. McClellan. So that's a motion by Ms. Miles from Virginia Beach, and I believe a second by Dr. Word from Chesapeake.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Any discussion? Hearing none, I'll call all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, that's great. I will move into the public comment section. We have no previously submitted public comments, but we do have Ed Ashley here who would like to speak. Ed, would you like to come forward?
Yes, I believe Mr. Ashley is here. Sir, if you want to come on up to the podium and you can address the commission.
Good morning. I'm here on behalf of myself. It's about waste management in the region, not just for where I'm from, York County, but this is about a regional issue. An elimination of landfills with a shift to a proper waste management and elimination that should be the goal in a regional plan. We need to shift from landfills to taking care of the waste properly and safely. Landfills may be emitting more methane than previously reported because the Environmental Protection Agency may be drastically underestimating how much garbage is being deposited in the nation's landfills, according to a new Yale University study. Now, this study actually happened in 2015. There was a follow-on in 2016. The study was published in the journal Nature, Climate Change in 2015. The study also found that open landfills emit 91% of all landfill methane emissions, while closed landfills are only 17% more efficient than open landfills. Methane is a greenhouse gas that gives up to 35 times more potent as carbon dioxide as a driver of climate change across the U.S. and from its landfills. The U.S. is the third largest source of methane emissions, according to the EPA. Well, I'm sorry, landfills are the third largest source of USA methane emissions. From 19 May 29, when the Sierra Club, and I'm not representing Sierra Club, I'm representing me. Sierra Club is not behind what I'm talking to you today about. They may someday, but not now. But the management meeting or the May 19 meeting included waste managers from York County, James City County, Newport News, and Hampton. And upon that, I developed this concept that you'll see before you. There's a briefing there. There's what I'm reading to you, and then there's a blurb on landfills and their emissions from the EPA. I developed this concept for regional recycling from that meeting. The concept is to reuse the Yorktown Dominion, Virginia power plant and the former Exxon refinery up on the York River. Both of those the power plant shut down and Dominion's in the process of trying to decommission it. The refinery is no longer refining. They took down all the cracking towers and refining equipment, but they still have the oil tanks in the port to ship from. You can pull up oil tankers to the ship and offload and then take it to wherever you need to have it refined. I've given this concept to both Dominion and Plains Marketing is who owns the old Exxon refinery now. They've run it up through their channels. Dominion was interested in the concept, but they've contacted me since and said they were going on to look at other options. So both of those for land use are kind of yet to be determined. Both the companies are looking at what they're going to do with the properties.
Mr. Ashley,
Yes.
we are excited to hear from you. Could you wrap it up in the next minute or so?
I can, just be a minute.
Thank you.
The center would use gasification at the power plant and pyrolysis at the refinery to incinerate non-recyclable products and also turn the plastic back into oil, which could be used and stored in their tanks. This would put the power plant back into power production with elemental products for sale to industry, using refinery's current infrastructure for oil and power production and power distribution via the power plant. This would save valuable land and infrastructure for potentially regional benefit. Concept would be beneficial to health and well-being of the region's populations with the elimination of the polluting landfills. We could shift our regional waste stream over time from landfills to the proper recycling process. The York facility could have a huge impact on waste management, which all communities share this problem. The advantages could include significant community savings of waste management expense, potential reduction in waste management fees, elimination or reduction of tipping fees, elimination in need for more landfill property, potential for additional jobs, increased tax revenue from the success of the recycling center products that they generate, electricity and elements and oil, and reduction of pollution to Chesapeake Bay, as well as reclaiming that land that is currently tied up with landfills and to be reused for other more productive economic uses. As Sweden is doing now, they're mining their landfills, doing this same process. This could support EPA's recently released waste management plan and garner their support and maybe funding. And you also have the Inflation Reduction Act sources of revenue to maybe help fund this, plus local community revenues. Thank you very much for allowing me to speak.
Thank you. Appreciate it. It's a really interesting idea. It's got a lot of merit for sure. Okay, I don't believe there's any additional public comment. I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Crum for the Executive Director's report.
I'll speak from up here. I want to be able to see everybody, but my monthly executive director's report is included in your agenda. I'm happy to respond to any questions. Madam Chair, just a couple of things that I wanted to mention. First off, for those of you that were at lunch or had made your way around our office today, you're going to see 3 new information monitors around the building, outside this room, in our lobby, and over in the 757 room. We're excited as we dial in that technology to improve our virtual or hybrid meeting capabilities, but also really our focus is to provide our visitors to the building information on the work that we're doing on your behalf and on the region's behalf. One of the things that we're doing today is our staff that does a lot of geographic information system work, they're circulating for you in honor of GIS Day. It is National GIS Week, but we're circulating some of the mapping that we do that analyzes critical information for our region. So hope you get a chance to take a look at some of those maps. Our staff's very proud of. Secondly, Madam Chair, I just wanted to say that, it's sort of a sad occasion, but we do have some members rotating off the commission. And with the chair's approval, I just wanted to recognize those people and even ask them to come forward. I know Ms. McClellan would like to say a couple of words and would like to get photographs of you in our chair. But the members who are rotating off, let's start with Mayor McKinley Price from Newport News, who has been a commission member for 12 years. And I have to say, for the record, this is the mayor's 3rd meeting today with us already, following his last State of the City last evening, which was a wonderful event. But Mayor Price, if you wouldn't mind coming forward. We also have our Vice Chair, Council Member David Jenkins. Mr. Jenkins has been with us for 4 years, but currently serves as Vice Chair. Mayor Frank Rabel from Franklin, who's been with us for 2 years. Mayor Rabel, I believe, is in the room. Thank you, sir. We have Council Member Delcino Miles. 2 months doesn't do service. Ms. Miles has been a long-standing member of our Community Advisory Committee and very involved with regional work. Councilmember John Moss from Virginia Beach is not present today. I don't believe Councilmember Guy Tower from Virginia Beach is. But Ms. McClellan, if I could turn that over to you just for a few words, and then I think we're going to do a few photos.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Crum. I appreciate it. I just want to say thank you to each of you for serving, whether it was 2 months or 12 years. It's very important. And what it shows is your dedication to regional leadership. And for all those folks that we hear in our communities that say we don't work together as a region, this organization and the folks in this room prove otherwise. So we really appreciate each and every one of you for being here. And for those who have served, thank you so much. And I think we have to do a photo op. Oh, sorry, we get to do a photo op. Sorry. So hold on one second.
Okay, girls.
All right. Okay. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Matt.
Okay, the next item is our Community Advisory Committee. Is Mr. Gadolski here? Yes, sir.
No report.
All right. Okay, we're going to move on to the consent agenda. Of course, we've modified it previously. Mr. Crum, are there any comments that you'd like to make?
No, we would like to ask our consent agenda with the removal of item E. We would ask for the commission's approval today, Madam Chair.
Okay. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda? Thank you.
Second.
Mr. Keaton, moved and seconded by Mr. Wheeler. Any discussion? Hearing none, I'll call for the vote. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, the motion passes. And now, I feel like I should have a drum roll. The reason you're sitting in the way that you are, oh, we're gonna have one more item, sorry. Oh, yes. I don't know what I would do without Mr. Crum here. So we did remove the item for the coastal master plan to add in for the request of the city of Norfolk, this additional support of their coastal storm risk management plan, specifically the Lafayette surge barrier. You should have a letter at your places with that information here. And I wanted to ask for a motion to approve this agenda item with this additional addendum.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. It's been moved by Mr. Wheeler, seconded by Ms. Miles. I wanted to open up for any discussion. Okay, hearing none, call for the vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, now we have the drum roll. Sorry about that. So this is a really exciting opportunity for us to mix things up a little bit and tackle a topic that is really important to all of the cities in our region and counties, but oftentimes just gets taken care of by our staff. But as our elected officials and our administrators, we think it's really important that you all are aware of this issue, which is going to become a really big priority as we hit the 2025 marker. So I'm going to now turn it over to Bob and your staff to take it from here.
Yes, Casey, why don't we just have you come up to the podium and we're going to go ahead and get started. What we want to stress is we sort of broke the mold today because today's about conversation. Today's about information exchange. Today's about understanding what your perspectives are on some issues. And our staff team, beginning with KC, is going to begin by walking through some background information on the Chesapeake Bay TMDL. So KC, over to you.
Thank you. It's good to be here. It's been a few years since I've been in front of the commission, so it's really good to be back because last time I was here was kind of to update everyone on how we were doing in our bay restoration efforts and requested by the state to help them develop their watershed implementation plan. Well, we're fast approaching 2025, so it's a really good time to kind of have a refresher. And so just to walk you through a little bit about today, we're going to talk briefly about the bay restoration itself. Where we are, what our progress is, where we stand, kind of delve into what's working and not working specifically for Hampton Roads and how we at the PDC can help. So I'm going to ask you all to do something unusual, and that's to grab your phones right now, and get out your camera app, please. And you have a QR code at your table. If you would prefer to use that, please help folks at the table if you can. There's QR code, or go to your menti.com and you can type in that number. So if everybody who's working at the tables, PDC staff, just give me a thumbs up and let me know that everybody's on the right page and we're good to go. That'd be good. Okay, so this first question's a softball. We're using a platform. It's called menti.com. You answer the question. Now I'm gonna caution you right away. It's gonna move on to the next question. Just hold on and answer that first question for me. We will hopefully have some live results. Perfect. This is what I was hoping for. Wow. So very few in the room have used Menti. I can see that we're still gathering some answers, but this is good. We're introducing something new to you. Just gonna give it a second. She can. If you want to move on to the next question, that's okay. I'm going to give you some time if you see that next question. So we've established that this is new. That's okay. We're breaking the mold here. This is a new platform, and I'm happy to see that we're showing folks how to use this. So you can take it home and show it to your friends. So the next question is asking you just top 3 things that come to your head that remind you of the Chesapeake Bay. And you can type those in and hit submit. And then I'm going to ask you to put your phones down after you've hit submit on that next question. Oh, it is completely anonymous, 100%. All right, I'm going to move on so we can see, hopefully, these words start to pop up in a word cloud. Wonderful. And it changes as you continue to type. We're going to save this word cloud as soon as everybody's done, and we'll use it. This is really helpful. I like that the top word is recreation. So the word cloud will adjust, of course, as people type in the same answer. That word will get larger, and you'll have things that people use a little less frequently. Scallops, restrictions, Chicks Beach. I love it. Not really in Chesapeake. I understand. We definitely have 2 localities that are not in the Chesapeake Bay, and I apologize for that. TMDL. Okay. So, like I said, the next question has popped up, but we're going to move on. I'm going to show a few slides so I can sort of acquaint folks to what it is exactly we're talking about with the Bay. I like that fishing is now the top one. That's perfect, right in our backyard. Okay, so we're going to move along, and I'm going to try to talk as high level as possible about what it is we're discussing today. This is the Chesapeake Bay Total Maximum Daily Load, TMDL. It is a pollution diet. This is a diet that has been established in 2010 by the Environmental Protection Agency and the Chesapeake Bay Program Office, who is housed within the EPA. And the goal for this TMDL is to reduce total nitrogen and total phosphorus. These are pollutants that can come off the landscape in a variety of different ways. And by reducing those pollutants, we're going to be decreasing dissolved oxygen. Dissolved oxygen is the lifeblood of the bay. And you can see that red spot there in the northern part of the upper part of the bay near Maryland. We want to make that red part go away to protect our natural resources for the critters and the crabs and the fish and the seagrasses to grow. And the goal to achieve is by 2025, we need to have 100% of practices in place. When I say practices, we need to do what we can to reduce those pollutant loads. Anything from upgrading wastewater treatment plants to improving our stormwater systems, to planting trees and vegetation to help improve the loads coming off the landscape. And those goals have to be achieved by 2025, and we have to try to do all of this in the next 2 years. Just gonna throw that out there. So when I talk about the Chesapeake Bay watershed, I'm talking about everything in that big blue line there. So it's a 64,000 square mile watershed. And a watershed is anything that is draining into rivers and streams that rolls off the landscape and it ends up into the Chesapeake Bay. So the Chesapeake Bay encompasses New York, central Pennsylvania, about a half of Delaware, most, if not all, of Maryland, a small portion of West Virginia, a very large portion of Virginia, and the District of Columbia. So it's 5 states and DC. So you can see there, Virginia did agree to these pollution reductions by the Chesapeake Bay Program Office, as well as these other states and DC. And these are all load reductions that are agreed to at a state level, but they must be addressed locally. Because really that's where the rubber meets the road. That's where any kind of improvements can be made. So that's a map there of Hampton roads. And yes, it's hard to see that blue line. There is a portion that is outside of the watershed for Suffolk and Virginia Beach and Chesapeake, Surrey and Isle of Wight, and some of the other localities that didn't quite make it in the watershed. But it's still, we are very well represented within the Bay watershed at the bottom of the Bay. So I'm going to go ahead and go on to one more mentee. So grab your phones again. And this one I'm going to give you a few minutes to discuss at your table because I kind of want to know where the lay of the land is. Again, anonymous. No idea who answers what. These are true false questions that are showing up. You're going to have a green for true and a red for red X for false. So do you think that the Bay States, meaning everybody from Pennsylvania on down to Virginia, will make this 2025 goal, this agreement that they've had since 2010? True or false? And you guys, I'm going to give you a few minutes to discuss at your tables, if that's okay. Take this picture, like from here. are that will reveal the answer. So first one is false. No, we will not, as a watershed, meet the goal by 2025. All of the Bay States are not going to make the goal, and I'll show that here in a second. One of the main reasons, well, I won't spoil it yet. Okay, Virginia is making progress on Bay cleanup, but we won't achieve our goals. That is true. Virginia is also not going to be able to make their goals. Pennsylvania leads the Bay cleanup effort. That is false. One of the main reasons that we are actually not making our goals is unfortunately because of the great state of Pennsylvania, and I am from there, so I can say that. The Commonwealth, correct. And one of the other reasons is because of what's happening in the agricultural sector there, and just several years of non-investment, unfortunately. But they are trying to turn it around and make great strides. Wastewater reduces the most pollutants for the Bay. That is actually correct. Wastewater is a great achiever, and I'll be talking about that here in a second. And voluntary agricultural practices, or things like stream fencing or cover crops, are actually some of the most cost-effective practices that we can do in the Bay. And they are voluntary because there is no regulations on agriculture. So that's it for now for the poll. We're going to come back to this at the end. I'm going to go through some more slides to talk a little bit about our progress. I hope. Let's go forward. Dimitri, oh, there we go. Okay, no. All right, so as I said, we are not making the goal. These are figures just for the whole watershed, so all the states, including DC. We are at about 49% of that total nitrogen goal, and we are about 64% of that total phosphorus goal. So quite a ways off, and again, mostly due to loads from Pennsylvania and the agricultural sector. In Virginia, we're doing much better, actually. A significant amount of our reductions have come from the wastewater sector across the Commonwealth. We're about 87% of that goal. And I'm going to tell you here in a minute why we're not quite there, though, and why we won't be there by 2025. So I've been talking a lot about what we call sectors. I'm trying not to use all the jargon that I use, but we put things in buckets. So we have a regulated bucket and an unregulated bucket. And what's regulated are things we can control, like wastewater in our municipal separate storm sewer systems, or MS4s. These entities have permits, and with these permits, they have limits that they have to achieve, and they have reductions that they have to make. They can make those reductions through wastewater treatment plant upgrades, through improving their stormwater systems, and through putting in what are called best management practices, or BMPs. These costs are borne by ratepayers for the most part. You have utility bills, you have stormwater fees, and you have local general funds that contribute to making these improvements in the regulated sector. In the unregulated sector, it's a little bit more ambiguous. You have a variety of different buckets that contribute to unregulated loads, and therefore the only way to mitigate those loads is through voluntary practices. One of the interesting buckets of the unregulated sector is called the natural sector. And these are natural lands that are actually the gold standard. If the entire Bay were forested, we wouldn't be here. We wouldn't be having this conversation because we wouldn't have impairments, but we know that's not a reality. And we have farms, and we have homes with septic systems, and we have parts of our landscape that are developed but actually aren't regulated and don't have permits on them. And so we have to make those reductions, but there's no stick, and there's very little carrots to make the reductions from these agricultural and unregulated developed sectors. So how do we incentivize the programs or these entities and develop programs and make these sectors work better? This is the challenge, and this is the challenge the state brought to us in Hampton Roads several years ago, because the majority of the loads that need to be reduced, particularly in Virginia and in Hampton Roads, come from this unregulated sector. So briefly, I'm just going to talk about how we're doing. We're doing pretty good. I'm not going to throw numbers at you for Hampton Roads because it's a little trickier, but we're doing really well, and we're making great strides in our wastewater reductions. I'm going to talk about that here in a second. We have very robust MS4 stormwater programs. There are actually 11 localities that hold MS4 stormwater permits in the region. Several of those permit holders, though, outside of the localities include universities, hospitals. VDOT is a major MS4 permit holder as well. But as I said, several years ago, the state requested that we beef up our voluntary reductions. But unfortunately, we didn't see a lot of opportunities thrown our way in terms of programs or funding available to make these voluntary reductions in the ag or the unregulated stormwater sector. So if these voluntary programs don't grow, what will happen to those loads that aren't addressed? Are they going to shift over to the regulatory side of the house that's already doing so well? This isn't something we really want to see. So we're trying to get ahead of the game and see, well, what is it more that we can do or help contribute to? So again, I want to just touch briefly on how well we're doing in that wastewater sector. HRSD, Hampton Road Sanitation District, is one of our, great champions for wastewater reductions. And I'm going to tell you now, we have an expert in the room. The general manager for HRSD is here, Jay Burness. And so he's here to answer any questions you might have related to what's happening at HRSD. They have made phased treatment plant upgrades over the years and are continuing and have planned ones for the future. They have developed the Sustainable Water Initiative for Tomorrow, SWIFT, or aquifer recharge, which I'm sure many of you have heard about, where they're treating wastewater to drinking water standards and injecting it into the Potomac aquifer for a variety of co-benefits across the region. This has helped establish a trading program to help address some of our MS4 needs in the stormwater programs that we run or help run. And these programs are not only because of SWIFT, but also because of the excess capacity that HRSD has. And so it's kind of taking the heat off of some of our MS4 stormwater permittees so that they can focus on other things like flooding if needed. And then it's really important to note that while there's a big price tag for these programs in the wastewater industry, they're more cost effective in some cases than some stormwater BMPs, especially here in the coastal plain of Hampton Roads. So this is a long-term investment that they're making for regional pollution reduction. And just to draw your attention to the funding, that the table on the right, essentially what's been spent to date and funds that have been requested from Virginia through their Water Quality Improvement Fund, WQIF fund, have been about $157 million. What needs to be spent to date, roughly about $900 million. That's not a small number. And that's a best case. And that's something that, we'd like to support and get behind, but it's something that needs to happen if we're going to keep going down this road to hope that all of those funds do not get spent on the backs of the ratepayers. So on the right is the HRSD funds spent to date, about 400 million and 785 planned for the future. And that is basically what the region would spend to make all of this happen. So it's not inexpensive, but it is certainly cost effective. And then briefly, our stormwater requirements, just so you're aware of how we've had established stormwater programs throughout the years. It's a combination of the MS4 permits as well as what's happening at the state level. So the first rule is don't make the problem worse. And so the state develops standards so that when there's construction in new development or redevelopment, we're making sure that we're being nutrient neutral, that we're not making the problem worse. And one thing that is happening is reevaluating those state standards, because for the most part, we're not really sure how good they are. And we also don't want to make sure that we have excess loads coming down to the MS4 permittees or any other regulated entity in the future. And then, the permits are actually designed for the MS4s to also make sure they're going back and fixing legacy problems. A lot of our localities were built out prior to any stormwater regulations in place. So now you have impervious surfaces that aren't really treated and runoff is going into our waterways. And so in order to comply with those permits, they have to implement these stormwater best management practices on prior developed land. We call those retrofits. A lot of the retrofits in the region are in the form of rain gardens, wet ponds, living shorelines, stream restoration. And some of these are even used for new development as BMPs as well. So really doing a lot in the stormwater program, whether it's at the state level or the local level, to make things happen in that regulated side. But as I said, we know what's not working. We know those reductions from ag aren't really getting accomplished. One thing I will note, though, it's not a huge focus here in Hampton Roads because about only 9% of the acres in Hampton Roads come from ag within the Bay watershed. So I don't focus on it too heavily and try to just continue to put pressure on the state to do some BMP implementations that need to accelerate at that level. But that unregulated developed piece, so these are folks that might not have an MS4 permit or might have lands outside of their MS4 service area. These are called those unregulated developed lands. We have about 17% of those acres in our region within the watershed. There's really no incentives to reduce those loads. And so if the state regulations in combination with that aren't nutrient neutral, there's another chance that we could see those loads increase again and come back to that regulated side of the house. So this is wrapping up here because we want to get on to some discussion. It's almost 2025 now. What? I don't have a crystal ball. I really don't know what the outcome will be if the goal isn't achieved overall. EPA hasn't come out and told us their plan. They haven't said what the threat really is going to be. Our concern is that that more will shift to that regulated side, and that we really need to continue to support those programs in our wastewater and stormwater, especially here in Hampton Roads. But we also need to find pathways to incentivize the voluntary practices. And if that's one way that we can go from here, that's great. If it's not the way that we want to go from here, when we're come back at us at 2025 and say, what more can you do? We're going to have to find an answer somehow. So what I'm going to ask you guys to do, just not quite yet, I want to describe these here for a minute, but if funding are available, or policies were in place, or there was a need to really prioritize any of these issues as a region or within your locality, would you consider taking any of these and rising some of these to the top of your list of priorities? This would be in a perfect world, because all of these things that I've put here aren't quite, they all help serve water quality, but they also can help serve quality of life issues as well. Planting and preserving trees, reducing pavement, expanding living shorelines, homeowner BMPs, those can be really popular. A lot of folks really want to do things at home that make them feel like they can be proactive, and there's programs in place that may not be available for everybody. Conserving more land so that you're offsetting development in the future. These are all issues that I'd like to have a conversation about at our tables if we can, and see what do you need to know about? What have you heard from your constituents about? What do you think is going to help in the future? And if funding were available from the state or from the federal EPA or the Chesapeake Bay Program Office, or if there are policies that we could help put forward or find out more information for you, what is it that really interests you and excites you? And so what we're going to do now is just have more conversations at the table, and there's your last Menti question, and then I'll show the results of that and see what priorities rose to the top. So if there are questions, because that was a lot of information.
I just have one question. Sheila,
Yes.
I don't remember, when did we leave that local government advisory group?
When did we do it?
When did we leave?
When did we leave? When McCall.
Okay, well, now, do you remember what year?
No, so that would be what, 5 years ago?
Okay, the baseline numbers for determining.
Ms. Ritter, can you speak into the microphone, my friend? You can just pick it up off.
And then my mother's gonna whisper down from wherever how rude I'm being. When the baseline local numbers were developed, they were quite faulty for many localities, including ours. In Chesapeake, they said within the watershed, there were 3,000 hogs. There were like 13. But they never adjusted those numbers. So our local goals are really based on faulty data. Is that being corrected?
Yes, every 2 years, the model gets updated with more correct data.
Well, I don't think they've ever updated that data for us.
I can check in, but I feel like they might have, but yeah.
I don't think so. Thank you.
So, okay, do we want to do questions, or do we want to just talk amongst our groups?
I just had a follow-up question about something that you said, and I don't need a long explanation. But you mentioned that localities generally in Hampton Roads are doing a pretty good job. Are there other MS4 holders, including the state? And I don't know if the federal government is required for their facilities, but relative to the localities that are doing well, would you say the state and the federal government are doing as well or better, or not as well?
I would say that the federal government does have their role to play, and they do have goals separate from the state. So they have been pulled out of the equation, and I could honestly don't know the status of them right now. I would say the state as a whole is not doing as well because of that unregulated piece.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to have conversation, and then you're going to be allowed to prioritize. There's going to be a sliding scale on that last question there for my part about what it is you think of should be a priority. And you don't have to decide as a group, but we can certainly have discussion around it.
So how much time are you going to give us?
All right, we might need to, oh, here we go.
You got it.
All right, if everybody could start voting or finish up your voting, Casey will display the results in just a couple minutes here. And then after you see the comments you do, and just sort of take these.
Yeah, I'll end on my resources.
1:30 and 10 least
Correct. No, 1 to 10, 10 being your highest. Yeah. 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 All right, I'm going to show the results. Oh, no, don't go small. Okay. This is cool. So I know that there's a lot more explanation than I probably needed to have on all of those buckets. I could talk for an hour on every single one of those, but I'm not going to do that. So it's really interesting to see planting and preserving trees coming to the top. That's really exciting. I was saying, you know, trees are great for water quality, not necessarily for water quantity, although they can be depending. And they're really good for addressing urban heat island effects. There's so many other things about the quality of life of trees, and Jill could spend an hour talking about trees here. But that's really cool that rose to the top, as well as reducing pavement, living shorelines, homeowner BMPs, and conservation of lands. And we've had some really great conversations. I just heard a few snippets at some of the tables. So I think, you know, what we're going to do is follow up on some of this and have more conversation. So I'm just going to leave this here for now and kind of just wrap up, because there's not much else for me to say. We're going to have a little bit more discussion, I believe. So the whole goal is to figure out what we can follow up on as a water resources department for you all, and what more you need to know. And I'm just going to leave this last slide up here on resources, because there are several things that can be helpful if these slides are sent out, where you can actually go through these modules on the local government advisory committee that Andrea sits on. To learn more about the Bay watershed. They're directed for local elected officials. There's the Chesapeake Bay Progress website, which actually tells you how we're doing as a bay, and it breaks it down by state and by whatever it is you're interested, whether it's the fish or the crabs or the nitrogen. And then our very own website, askhrgreen.org, has some information on bay restoration. So.
First of all, can we give Casey a round of applause for? And Bob and your whole team, you brought this idea to us, and I thought, oh, this will be interesting. Did y'all like this idea of doing this every so often and sort of digging into a topic and having some more discussion? I think it went really, really well. So great job there. I just wanted to open this up now, see if there are any takeaways that you might have, and you know, if anybody wanted to offer anything, we'll maybe spend a couple of minutes on that real quickly, or we can move on. Delsino.
I know a lot of this, we're government officials, but what role can the private sector play, not looking necessarily for a public-private partnership, but what role do they really play from a fiscal standpoint and accountability standpoint in terms of water quality?
I think those are a function of maybe your local zoning laws and what they have to implement there, the types of building codes. They have regulatory elements there, but it's a great question. And to the point about MS4s as well, you know, like our airport, for example, or universities, and they don't have to necessarily play in that game. And that's a big piece of the puzzle. So, you know, a lot of this is just an awareness thing. I'm not sure everybody really had been thinking about this a whole lot, but it is really, really important. Does anybody know what SLAF funding is? Good. Stormwater Local Assistance Funding. That's a really great opportunity for each of our municipalities as well, to help address a lot of these BMPs. And one of the things that we did, thanks to HRPDC a couple of years ago in the General Assembly, is we changed the formula for SLAF funding slightly to make it easier to access for our more urban areas, which is really what the Hampton Roads region does. So thank you. Casey was a big part of that as well. And that's another reason why we need to continue to encourage our friends in the General Assembly to increase SLAF funding so that we have access to these opportunities to improve our stormwater as well. Any other comments or? Yes, sir.
I have a question for staff, just looking into this. My brother and my cousin are farmers just across the border in North Carolina from Chesapeake. And one thing my brother was telling me recently is that they've noticed they were having a problem with their crops a few years ago and they couldn't figure out what the problem was. They found there was a lack of sulfur. And they said they used to get enough sulfur from the air that they didn't have to add sulfur, but the air is cleaner now. So they're actually having to add sulfur. I mean, this is a really unique problem. They're having to add sulfur to the fertilizer because they're not getting naturally. So it shows that the air is cleaner. And my question is that because of the reduction of the coal-fired power plants? Does anyone know that? Or I'd just be interested to see that because, I mean, they had a problem. They couldn't figure out what the problem was until they determined that when they had Cooperative Extension come out and say, well, there's not enough sulfur in the plants. So they actually had to add sulfur. So that's a real situation that just has occurred in the last few years. But it's just curious to see if anyone could find that out or knows.
So we went from water to air.
Yeah, we can.
Well, but it was falling on the land.
Yeah,
So
no,
that was
absolutely.
I mean, I think you're right. I mean, part of the Bay program is actually air pollution and the fact that, then the rain brings the air pollution to the soil, but we can look into it. I don't know off the top of my head exactly that connection between, the air pollution changes and the fertilizer. So put it on the to-do list.
If I could, just a follow-up sentence or two on that to get it back to this. If the air is cleaner and we don't have sulfur in it, but now we are adding land application to agriculture, will we have a future sulfur TMDL? I mean, I don't know if that's good or bad for water, but it seems like sometimes our efforts in one direction may cause a reaction in another that potentially could be just as bad or worse.
I think you bring up a great point that, these systems continue to change and evolve. So for example, when this program got started, I don't think we realized the precipitation rates would be what they are right now, or that sea level rise would happen to the extent that it is. So not only are we trying to reduce our TMDLs based on what used to have, now what we're seeing is because of that flooding that's coming up onto our lands, onto our grasses, and then receding back into our waterways, it's taking even more problem with it. So that's another thing that they're going to have to adjust as a result. And I believe Whitney, Casey, they've tried to include some of those changes to the new WIP, the Watershed Improvement Plan. But it's an ongoing process. And one of the things that I worry about is we all talk about whether or not we're going to meet 2025. Well, what happens if we don't? And we don't know. So it's a big question. It's really a function of what happens at the EPA in 2025. So that's a big thing.
Well, I'll just say a teaser. We won't make 2025, and they're already developing new models to go beyond and include climate change. And everything's already changing at that level. And so there will be new targets. They will come down well past our time. Well, probably around 2030, we're going to see something new. But that's all I can say. That's all I know. But it's certainly being thought about and discussed and moving on.
Another thing, who all knows who all in here is in a soil and water conservation district in their municipality? And who doesn't even know what a soil and water conservation district is? So, I mean, I do now, but so if you're in a soil and water conservation district in the Commonwealth of Virginia, you have access to something called VCAP, which are funds that you can use as your municipality to provide living shorelines, to fund living shorelines for your constituents. So if you're not in a soil and water conservation district, like the city of Hampton, who's just entered into an MOU with the Soil and Water Conservation District so that they can start to access those VCAP funds. I don't know, Mayor Tuck, if you want to talk about that real quickly, or. Okay. And if you do, if you can put your microphone on.
Yeah, I don't have much to add, but it is a program that we've entered into. We submitted the information to them several months ago. And so if anybody has any interest in how that process works, I can get you connected to the right people in the city of Hampton. We can maybe help you out with that.
Thank you.
Anything else you want from me?
You covered that so well. I like how you delegate. Okay. Any other comments? If not, we'll move on. Mr. Crum.
Yes, so if you can hang with us here, we do have a second topic, and when we bring Ben McFarland up, now I'm gonna give you all a little inside baseball. It's a little bit of staff fun. So we had a little bet on whether or not Ben would make it to the podium. So I think KC's going to get a free lunch from Ben, right? But Ben's going to lead us on some background information on U.S. Army Corps of Engineer 3x3x3 studies.
Yes. All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I am really excited that I get to talk to you today about this. So even though I have to buy lunch for Casey at some point, I think it's just a trade I'm willing to make. So this afternoon, this is not the first time we've talked about this topic. Just come back and in light of some relatively recent developments, talk a little bit more about these studies, this partnership between localities at the regional level and with the Corps of Engineers, and how important that is and how much of a benefit that can provide to our communities. There are, I think, many new faces in the room from the last time we talked about this, and it's a timely topic. So I'll just go ahead and dive right in. The 3x3x3 studies. So what is one of these studies? So the Corps, the process they use to identify and implement projects, it all starts with a study, a feasibility study, or what they call a 3x3x3 study. That's the thing they use to figure out what projects have a federal interest, what projects they are kind of willing to help provide and pay for. When it comes to water resources development, things like flood risk reduction, ecosystem restoration projects, navigation projects, these are all the types of projects that the Corps does. But they use these studies, that's the starting point. The 3x3x3, it comes from three things, 3 years to complete, so you get 3-year time frame. $3 million total. These are not going to be giant projects or giant studies that could cost tens of millions of dollars. It's a $3 million cap, and they engage all three levels of the Corps throughout the entire process to make sure that the process is as kind of easy and as streamlined as possible. So that's the district level. So for us, that would be the Norfolk District, the division. We're in the North Atlantic Division, and then headquarters. And the result, once you actually do one of these studies, and we've had one recently completed here in Hampton Roads in Norfolk, another one that's underway. But the result of this study is what they call a chief's report. And that is the official document that says, this is the plan that we think is worth implementing. They hand that off to Congress, and then it goes into a black hole. No, actually, it gets used by Congress to help make decisions about what goes into a future Water Resources Development Act, which is that key piece of legislation that's passed every year or so, every other year, that will define kind of what projects the Corps gets to work on and where all that money goes. So why do we care about these studies? If you don't have a feasibility study, you don't have a list of projects, if you don't have that official list of projects, you're not going to get Corps funding for construction. And some of these projects can be extremely expensive. I think we've seen all in the news lately, some of the reporting coming out of Norfolk and the recent developments there. The funding that has been made available for the city for some of these storm risk reduction projects there, and the hundreds of millions of dollars for those. That's a lot of money. That's not a lot of money that most of our localities here, or that any of you, I would never volunteer any of you to have to pay that much all on your own. And so figuring out a way where we as a region or as individual localities can get these studies done, can get our projects on these lists so that we are qualified for that federal funding, that's kind of a big deal. But, I think, stepping back, just kind of frame how much money we're talking about here. This shows for the last 5 years, the annual money from the Water Resource Development Acts. Those are the different fiscal years down there, the 5 columns on the left. We're talking on average around $700 million a year just for flood risk reduction construction projects. And then those last 2 columns on the right, those are supplemental legislation that was passed in the last year or so. The Disaster Relief Supplemental Appropriations Act, I think I got that right, of 2022. And then more recently, the Infrastructure and Investment and Jobs Act of 2022. And you can see that there's almost an order of magnitude difference. The annual work program, that's a lot of money there. But on occasion, Congress decides to really loosen the purse strings and makes a lot of money available for these types of projects. So the key is you want your projects to be on that list. You want them to be eligible so that when this money does come down the pike, you can get one of those checks. You are able to get some of that funding from the Corps. If we don't have those studies done, then at best you might be able to get a study funded. But you're not going to be able to get projects funded for construction. And that's the key thing there, is to be ready for when that money becomes available. So where are we? Well, the good news is that we worked with the Norfolk District a few years ago to get authorization for these types of studies for the entirety of coastal Virginia, included in a Water Resource Development Act. So that's good. We can all get a study. It's not that simple, but at least we have that authorization. That's the key first step. And then once you have that authorization, you can start, once you get approval from the Corps, you get in their work plan, you get to the point where you're actually doing a feasibility study. And we're very excited to see that Virginia Beach was able to get that done this year. And they've just recently signed the cost share agreement with the Corps and are working on the scoping of that project right now. So that's extremely exciting for that project. Norfolk is right now in the middle of what they call preliminary engineering and design. That's where the Corps takes all those projects that they worked on before and identified and said, okay, let's go actually and dig in and make some more drawings and do the engineering work so that we know how much they're going to cost, all the nitty-gritty details. And then once they've done all that work, then they can move on to construction. And so each of these steps, there's a process in order to get kind of authorization done, get the approvals with the Corps. But these are the four big ones here. So as I said before, we're all authorized. But the key issue here is, we're on the list. We can get a study. We're allowed to have a study. Congress, in all its infinite wisdom, has decided that they won't just let everybody, even if they're authorized, actually have a study at the same time. So they have to go. So there's a role for Congress to actually authorize who can actually get these studies or who can get projects done. But then Congress says, wait. We don't think that the Corps can handle all that work at one time. And so they cap the number of what they call new starts per year for both investigations, or those are the studies, that's the term they use for these studies, and construction projects. And you can see over the last few years, let's just say that the number of studies and projects that people want to get built across the country far exceeds the number that Congress allots for new starts from year to year. And so getting in line, getting one of these new starts can be kind of tricky. It can be done, but it takes a lot of time, a lot of effort, and probably more than a little bit of luck to actually get one of these studies in the Corps' work plan for an actual kind of one of the fiscal years. And so we've had some mixed results here. I mentioned before, Norfolk's had a study that was done following Hurricane Sandy and some of the work that came out of that. Following that storm event, Virginia Beach was able to get one through the IIJA this year. But we've been having conversations. There have been conversations about a peninsula study for a number of years now, and have not been able to get that new start authority passed. So again, for us, I think it's important that we recognize that, one, we're there, we can do it, but it's going to take us some work as a region, I think, for us to get to the point where we can get that study and any other further studies kicked off. For us, I think, the takeaway is that we know that flooding is going to be expensive for us here in Hampton Roads. The work that's been done so far already shows that we're in the 10 figures, probably inching towards the 11 figures in terms of the total price tag. The Norfolk 3x3x3 study initially estimated $1.4 billion. And since that's been completed, was completed in 2019, in the last 3 years, that number has gone up by another $400 million. Inflation, we're all dealing with it. The Virginia Beach, the flood protection program that the city passed last fall, which was this is completely separate from what they're doing with the Corps, estimates the estimated cost of that to implement that project or that program over the next 10 years is going to be over $500 million, billion with a B. And then if we look at across the region at all the different types of resilience related projects that we've identified and working with all of your staffs, the price tag right now, actually as of last fall, is nearly $5 billion. And that's just in the proposed projects. That's not even the projects that are under design, under construction, or have been completed. And just for frame of reference here, the Community Flood Preparedness Fund, which we're all very excited about and very thankful that the state is putting some money into these programs, so far has the CFPF has been allocated about $200 million with an M. So an order of magnitude in terms of what the state has been able to put in so far, been willing to put in so far, compared to what our forecasted need is going to be in terms of dealing with these flooding challenges and all the infrastructure, all the improvements, both structural and non-structural, that are going to be necessary. So the question is, are we ready? Are we ready to take advantage of these opportunities? Are we ready to really kind of go all in and try to get ourselves in line to be there if the Corps, if there's another infrastructure act one of these days, or if there is a storm that comes through and that Virginia is in the area of influence, of impact, and there's a supplemental funding bill that comes in after one of those events, which is not uncommon. Will we be ready as a region, as individual localities, to provide the resource to have the money available for the non-federal match? That's key. For the studies, for those 3x3x3 studies, there's a 50% non-federal match. Half the money comes from the Corps, half the money has to come from either the state or the localities. For construction, it's a little bit nicer of a deal for localities, but there's still a 35% non-federal match requirement. And I think, when talking to, the staff that we work with in the city of Norfolk and the leaders there, that's not a little bit of money. There's a lot of money involved in providing the match, the non-federal match for some of these larger structural flood protection projects. If we're talking about a $200 or $300 million project, you're looking at another $100 million of that's got to come from a locality. That's a lot of money for any one individual locality to have to pay in that time frame. Because when the opportunity is there, you have to be ready to kind of grab that ring. Otherwise, the Corps may start looking at other communities or other states that are better prepared to provide that non-federal match. So this is where you get to have another chance, a little more discussion. It'll be a little less time for this topic than we had for Casey's. But in your small groups, do you have funds for this? If not, where should the money come from? Have you thought about where you would like that money to come from? Have you thought about how the state currently provides money and what potential issues there are with that those funding mechanisms? So you get a couple minutes here just to chat amongst yourselves at your tables. The staff here to help kind of guide that conversation. It'll be a short chat and then we'll circle back. these issues and really inform a lot of the work that we're doing in our resiliency program here at the staff level, trying to come up with ways and suggestions we can have for the state. Whitney and I are both participating in the technical advisory committee for the coastal resilience master plan. So really trying to get all these different boats rowing, all these oars, everyone on the boat rowing in the same direction. So staff took some notes. I'm really excited to hear about what got said during the tables, but we have just a quick poll, and I would say there is a right answer to this question, but no, there's no right answer to this question. But we are curious, and this should be on the Menti, the same Menti that you had before on your phone. But just for us, to help us kind of frame our thinking about this and what our role as staff here at the PDC can be is, on a scale of 1 to 10, do you think of this more as a local issue for each of your individual localities, or as a more of a regional issue? And so 1 would be it's all local, and 10 would be it's all on the region. And there should be this should work. We're hoping that it's going to start. So if you start, maybe I'm looking at Dimitri. I'm wondering, he's got control.
You can use the same barcode that's on your table.
Yes, it would be. So if you
It's taking me to the beginning of the end.
It's taking us back to the Ches Bay questions.
Yeah, it's not picking up here. It's starting from the beginning.
Alas. Okay. Well, that's all right. Just tell the staff person at your table, and we'll compile it together.
So Ben, it might be interesting. Ms. McClellan, did you want to ask that question?
Yeah, I mean, just out of curiosity, just show of hands, who thinks it should be more local versus, I mean, I guess everybody wants to be anonymous now. I think we're split. Somewhere in the middle.
Or somewhere in the middle. That's kind of what I thought it would end up being. Okay. An 8. Okay. We'll bring this back in January, and we'll have this at the very beginning of the meeting in January. But I think so. We're good. I think that's. Yeah. So, in closing, we tried Menti twice. 1 for 2 ain't bad, right? So, a couple things to kind of keep in mind and to possibly kind of initiate some future discussions about this issue. We've had a lot of discussions at the staff level and with your staff through our Coastal Resiliency Committee about this topic. Something, we meet every quarter, talk about these issues and some of the possible regional priorities. 3x3x3 study for the peninsula, I mentioned before, that's been talked about for years. I think at the regional level, we've never quite, put our whole collective weight behind it. Now that Norfolk has finished their study and Virginia Beach is just starting theirs, maybe something for us to consider as a region getting behind a study on the peninsula to look at all of those communities and have them brought to the same kind of status as the communities on the south side. And then this larger question, and we do not have the answer, but we are hoping that you will think about this a little bit. State funding to help with the non-federal match. This has come up before in previous discussions with this board, but also with our committees. Mentioned before that the CFPF has only had $200 million total so far, and that's more than we thought we would get from that fund. From the RGGI allocations, there is a move right now by the administration to withdraw the state from RGGI, which would eliminate that particular source of funding for the Community Flood Preparedness Fund. But even if if we don't withdraw from RGGI, there's not a lot of money there that's coming in. So where would the other money come from? Having that discussion, that's a hard discussion. That's not something with an easy answer. And then looking back at the CFPF, how that program has been crafted and been administered at the state level, are there ways that we can tweak that program to make it more helpful for communities here in Hampton Roads and to prioritize projects, the match for these larger federally funded projects? Things to keep in mind, to think about a little bit, not expecting any answers here today. But really appreciate your discussion, your involvement in this chat that we've had this afternoon. Look forward to hearing from my colleagues here about what you all talked about. And thank you again.
Ben, did your Powerball numbers hit? That's just wondering if Powerball numbers hit?
Powerball is hit? No, no. If I won the Powerball, do you think I'd be here, Ms. Miles?
Just a thought for funding.
I would come back for one meeting. One meeting.
Well, I have to say, I don't think I've ever been to a PDC meeting where I've heard this much laughter. I heard some giggles. Who was giggling? Oh, Patrick was giggling? Boy, Patrick, your voice has changed. No, I think this is great, Bob. I appreciate you recommending this format, and we'll try and reintroduce this for some other meetings in the future as well. It's nice to be able to talk with one another, and maybe you got to know each other a little bit better as well. So we have a couple of other agenda items. That's all information that's within your packet as well. But because it is 2:00, we want to make sure that you all have the ability to get on with your day. I just want to say happy Thanksgiving, happy holidays to each and every one of you. You have a safe and happy holiday, and we will see you back in January in the new year. This meeting's adjourned.